All right, we're live. Welcome everyone to the stream. It's been a while since my microphone's emitting sound. Anyways, we're live now. Welcome everyone. It's been a while since I've had a stream, and let me know if there's any echoing from my microphone. If my microphone's fine. Today I'm joined with Christian Mario and Luigi, both famous Twitter personalities all over the social media. And first of all, I'd like to say sorry I haven't been able to stream or make videos for some time, mainly because I've been busy with some real life things. Basically, I've been busy with real life. So I have with me, as I said, Christian Mario and Luigi. And just kind of, I'd like you to introduce yourselves to my audience and also to each other in terms of how you became Orthodox and the topics we're going to be talking about in the stream today.
Yeah, for sure. I can go first. First of all, yeah, thanks for having us on. It's gonna be fun to talk about this. It's been a hot topic, obviously, these last couple of days. I've never seen this much conversation at least from the Protestant side, as far as addressing Orthodoxy directly. Usually we see it, them attacking Roman Catholics, but we've seen a lot of dialogue in the last couple of days as far as Protestantism, which obviously both Mario and me, come from a Protestant background. I grew up, my dad's a non-denominational pastor. And then I was in the Reformed circle for several years. That's really where I started studying church history, was in the Reformed circles. I was in a non-denominational sort of Reformed-ish church for a couple of years. And then I was confessionally Presbyterian, before converting to Orthodoxy. And ironically, it was church history that made me Presbyterian. And then it was church history that brought me out of Presbyterianism and into Orthodoxy. And it was really reading St. Augustine and realizing that I was just quote mining him as a Presbyterian because he didn't believe in about 90% of what I believed in as a Presbyterian. Things like apostolic succession, he saw as absolutely necessary. The threefold office, he saw as absolutely necessary. So it was very clear to me that I was quote mining St. Augustine. And that was one of the final points for me in converting to Orthodoxy was recognizing that. So yeah, I was baptized on Lazarus Saturday about a year ago, coming up on a year ago, in a couple months. And yeah, here I am.
And I just have one question before we move it.
Yeah.
Mario. Obviously Christian Mario, I've seen him on Twitter ever since he was, I believe, Reformed. I hope I'm not wrong, but he was Reformed and he became Orthodox. You came out of nowhere and you got the name Luigi. Was that intentional, or is it just kind of like a happenstance?
There's actually the funny story behind that. So I've been rocking as Luigi since 2020. I built a platform for politics in 2020. And I went by Luigi back then. I actually didn't meet Mario until we met in person because he is best friends with my now brother-in-law. And it just happened that we had been separately building our brands as Mario and Luigi for several years. And then now it looks like we did it on purpose, but we actually didn't. That's the funny thing. It's a total coincidence. So, and then, yeah, we both became, convinced of Orthodoxy around the same time too. Really not really knowing each other. And then when I did my debate with Voice of Reason, he kind of helped me get traction on Twitter, and now here we are, and everyone thinks that we did this collaboration when in reality it was a total coincidence.
Yeah, no, they're definitely suspect of whatever Orthodox network is going on, pulling the strings behind the scenes. Because it's like, is there some sort of Talmudic network with the Orthodox where they're just creating fake celebrities out of nowhere? But no, I met him in real life organically, and his brother-in-law is a great guy. And through talking to him, it made me way more passionate about the faith and wanting to talk about it more. And I'm not sure if there's an echo. Is this echo bad or no?
Just as long as your volume, I don't hear an
side.
echo, but as long as your volume is off on
Oh,
your
okay.
phone, you should be fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyhow, I was exposed to Orthodoxy for the first time in 2021. I went to a ROCOR service that my buddy had invited me to, Southern Baptist background, and he was invited. Or no, he wasn't invited. He actually did a Bible study on church history, and then started Googling stuff. And then I think he discovered Orthodoxy through Wikipedia. And he ended up converting back in 2019 and invited me in 2021. I went. And as soon as I went, I was like, I'm worried this might be correct. It just felt right. And then I was like, but I was not intellectually convinced at all. And then it just took me kind of fighting the inevitable for a long time. And eventually I gave up and converted. And I owe Eric Ibarra for that. And I owe Michael Lofton. They were great helps in my conversion to Orthodoxy because I watched so much of their content. And while watching their content, I was exposed to Orthodox arguments and ultimately decided not to convert to Catholicism. So, yeah. And I was recently baptized, so very excited to be on here and talking to you guys about Orthodoxy.
Yeah, many years. Congratulations. And I want to see everyone in the chat congratulate Christian Mario for this momentous moment. I mean, he's been waiting quite some time. And
Yeah.
I'll also go over my story a little bit. Of course, unlike these two lucky gentlemen, I am not from the United States, as my accent might betray. I am from Turkey. And so I've lived pretty much there for most of my life. So, you know, in one of the things in Turkey is that like the cultural divide is mostly regional, right? I guess it's similar to the United States, right? Like you have the Midwest, you have kind of like, again, like the north-south divide in some regards, like historically and even contemporarily. In Turkey, it's kind of similar, though there's not like direct conflict. It's kind of like very culturally not divided, but multifaceted. So until I was 18 years old, I was pretty much a typical secular. I didn't really care about religion at all. My household, my family they're pretty much the typical. In Turkey, you have three kinds of households in terms of religion. You have the conservative Muslim household, you have the secular Muslim household, and you have the secular household, right? Just the secular, non-religious, anti-religion household. And mine was basically kind of just that, right? Pretty much anti-religion. So I had a lot of those kinds of presuppositions as I was growing up. But as I was growing up and as I was maturing over time, I couldn't really have the same thought about religion. I had to take it more seriously. And through, talking with some friends, talking with some people I met online, and researching over time for superficial reasons. At first, I became Orthodox, and as I started going to church, as I took it seriously, I started to stay for those reasons, right? So I got into the door for superficial reasons, but I stayed for the theology, for the all-encompassing aspect of Orthodoxy, both in terms of the Christian faith and in terms of understanding the spiritual life. And as time went on, and as after I was baptized, I started this YouTube channel. The initial purpose was just like basic stuff, like just talking about the basic stuff, basic things about Orthodoxy. And over time, as people wanted me to make videos about other things as well, it just ended up becoming this like theology channel, I suppose, at this stage. So that's pretty much my journey. So I'm the foreigner here, but the reason why I have brought the Mario brothers here is, well, I think they are a great example of two classic American people from the foreigner's perspective, classic American men that are Orthodox and have their own experiences in becoming Orthodox while being in the United States, while being part of the American culture. And what kickstarted this stream, like this idea, is seeing a lot of these Protestant masculinity dude bro personalities. At least from my perspective, maybe they're actually just Protestant people, just normal Protestant people, but they were making these strange arguments against Orthodoxy to convince Protestants not to become Orthodox, and they were trying to make arguments. So of course, they can make arguments, but there's some really comical arguments that I've seen And I want to show one of those. I want to start with one of those arguments. And he was in fact quote tweeting Mario. Let me see if I can share screen so you can see exactly what I am talking about. It's this one. So I'm going to read it for you, for those who are just listening while they're driving somewhere. This is from CJ Engel. Again, I don't know who these people are. I'm a foreigner. I don't know who these people are. But he says, not being Eastern Orthodox because it's not your heritage is actually a decent argument and a healthy instinct. So what do you think about this? I just want to ask you two, what's your thought when you hear this argument?
I think it makes a lot of sense coming from a Protestant perspective if you presuppose Protestantism's true. I think if you're not approaching it with that presupposition and you're looking at it just as an argument, it's terrible. But if you're approaching it with the idea that Protestantism is already true, then yeah, it makes the most sense to go with the most American expression of your faith, which would probably not be whatever CJ is and would probably be some form of Puritan Baptist or something.
I mean, I just find it incredibly this whole conversation, I think, is ironic because, you know, we're often criticized in the Orthodox community of being like primarily ethnic, right? And supposedly, you know, Roman Catholicism and Protestantism are like, you know, that's the Christianity for all, right? For all ethnicities. And Orthodoxy is it's specifically Greek, or it's, you know, specifically Antiochian or specifically Russian, whatever I retweeted this because it's hilarious. Like just the irony behind this. I mean, the fact that they would ever dare criticize us for being like ethnic ever again. Like I'm bringing this up like every time. And it's not just from Protestants. I mean, like, you know, I think similarly, like Roman Catholics feel that, you know, they're Western and so therefore, you know, compatible with American values in a unique way that Orthodoxy isn't. And it's just like, okay, well then like you're just guilty of the same, you know, ethnic criticism that you give us. So
I also just think what we're doing is very American too. Like I'm not even ashamed of my American heritage in any sense. I mean, what Americans do is we pioneer things. We conquer things, we invade things. And now we've got a bunch of Americans invading Greek and Russian churches. What's more American than that? It's like we're flooding their churches. We're making them all eat cheeseburgers. Like we're invading, you know? And so, and I say that tongue in cheek, I have a lot of respect for the people that brought the faith to us. And I don't want in any way to kick them out of their own churches or something. But what I will say is that they've been gracious hosts to us. So as far as the ethnic point's concerned, I go to a Russian church. Everybody in my church, for the most part, minus the Americans, which probably makes up like 25%, and that's being generous, maybe less, are Russians. And they treat us incredibly well. They love having us. And it just takes a minute to warm up because it's like, you know, if you're not used to the Slavic culture and the way that they carry themselves, you might think that they don't want you there. But over time, when you build rapport, you realize these people really care about you, really like having you. And I've had an excellent experience. So as far as the ethnic concern goes, I mean, they love having Americans there.
Yeah. And then I have basically in the opposite experience as far as the, you know, converts to the cradles, as far as the percentage at our parish. You know, we have majority converts, but the cradles that are there are very, you know, it's very similar to what Mario's talking about. Extremely welcoming, always have been. They love the converts. In fact, a lot of times there's multiple cradles at our parish that actually return to the church because of the mass conversions. And not only that, but they also, because of how seriously they see the converts taking the faith, it kind of ignites something inside of them to start taking the faith more seriously as well. And so just overall, like the mass conversions has been very welcomed by the Orthodox Church, and it's been extremely healthy for the Orthodox Church as well, for the cradles and the converts.
Yeah, and aside from that, I also want to kind of talk about, I guess, a little bit about like my experiences in this regard, just to kind of give you a basic idea. I mean, even here, you have, I will say, it's not like it's obviously not like super unprecedented growth as you see in the United States, but you even see it here, right? And there's, if there's any kind of like, oh, this is not your cultural heritage. I mean, you kind of have that like quadruple at least in Turkey, where you have a lot of people who are like nominally Muslim, and they're Muslim because they're Turkish, right? That's what our identity is. But I also want to add something that I found interesting about this argument, and I want to show you the screen again. Look at his bio, right? Heritage American, counter-revolutionary, Augustinian classical Protestant, right? Augustinian classical Protestant. So you have Protestantism, it coming as a result of Luther, right? It has this kind of German historical heritage. Okay, that's fine so far. And you have Saint Augustine. Now, Saint Augustine is North African, right? He's not really someone who is in the center of Europe, so to speak. And if you go deeper into this, you kind of see how this like Western identity and heritage point doesn't really stand, because first of all, especially American identity and culture, I mean, there's a lot of Greek influence, right? Like I think we can fairly admit that, Greco-Roman influence in that regard. And in terms of Christianity, you have Tertullian is considered to be the father of Latin Christianity. He's also North African. You have, in terms of Trinitarian theology, right, the foundation of Trinitarian theology, which even Protestants themselves, right, they try to like Saint Athanasius a lot. Well, Saint Athanasius was Egyptian, and in fact, he was referred to as a black midget derogatorily. Now, I'm not trying to say he was like he was a brother or anything like that, but the point that I'm trying to make is these people are not what you will classically refer to as, or even Greeks, right? Like you will not classically refer to them as Western today, according to these people, but yet they form part of the Western heritage and tradition. And so the question is, ultimately, when we talk about Orthodox Christianity, I mean, we're talking about again these historical figures, Tertullian, St. Augustine. These people are not like from Europe, whereas we're talking, on the other hand, right, like these from their perspective, right, it's a Greek-Russian thing. Greece is in Europe. In fact, Greece is one of the most important cultural places for European heritage. And then you have Russia, which is also European. So it's not a good argument anyway, as Mario pointed out. But also in this regard, like even if he admitted that this is a legitimate argument, I mean, in a sense, it's not a good argument when you respect it, right? Even if you respect it, it's not a good argument because it's really not historically true. It's not really, it's just very inconsistent with historiography. But of course, I kind of have an idea, because the historiography that he has in mind, it's a very specific historiography that developed over time, and that's a topic for a different video. But I just think that it's not really a legitimate argument, so to speak. It's really strange, at least to my ears. What do you guys think?
I mean, I think you're right, but I also think like it really takes like what's really crucial to all of this is a very, very specific idea of what is American. So I guess what the argument really boils down to is, like we're heritage Americans. A lot of us, we can go back to the founding. We've been here forever, and the forms of religion that were nurtured here are the ones that should remain here. Would be the main attitude. Now, that we have a word for that in Orthodoxy. It's called ethnophilitism. It's a heresy. But I think from their perspective, it's like, look, we're trying to preserve our heritage. And this is a tough time to be an American. I mean, you're facing mass immigration. You're facing, I don't know if I can say this on YouTube, but, America's going to look a little different in the future years. And there's going to be less people that look like me and Luigi and more people that look different than us, And so there's a lot of people that are very concerned about this. And so they see religion demographics changing as well. And that's terrifying to a lot of Americans too, where it's like, we're going from a primarily Protestant and Catholic nation, more Protestant than Catholic, to a lot of Hindus, a lot of Muslims. And then we've got these Orthodox guys and they're talking about hesychasm. Like, what is that? What do they mean by that? And then they do like a quick Wikipedia search and they're like, sounds like a lot of navel gazing. It's more yoga stuff. And then they start thinking we're syncretists, or that we're trying to promote some sort of yoga idea, which couldn't be farther from the truth. But you have these very easy to understand outside perceptions that if this is meant as an apologetic to guys like me and Luigi who are in the church and who are Americans, is going to fall right on its face, because it's like, we know that we're not supposed to just like go into weird yoga trances and practice weird Eastern spirituality. I think what really matters when I was approaching this was, I didn't view it so much as an East and West issue. I viewed it as tradition versus modernism. And I felt like the Catholic Church and the Protestant Church had a lot of modernism. And I felt like the Orthodox Church was the only one that was contending with that within their own ranks. Not that it didn't exist, not that there weren't people pushing bad agendas within the church, but that it was the only one actively trying to combat it. And so that for me was pretty influential, because I was like, well, I want to go where they take the faith seriously, So for me, anecdotally speaking, I don't know. I viewed it as not a East versus West thing, but a tradition versus modernism thing. And so I'm not anti-Western. I don't hate the West. I love the West. But I also think that the Greeks built the West too. Like, I don't think the West can be reduced to just Puritans on the Mayflower. But at the same time, I'm proud of that heritage. I'm absolutely proud of that heritage.
Yeah. And I mean, to argue that like we can't, there's been nation after nation that has been Christianized. I mean, that's literally the Great Commission, right? And the Orthodox Church, we claim to be the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, right? The universal church, right? We have the right to Christianize whatever nation that we please, right? And we did it with Rome, and we did it with Russia, and we're going to do it with America. And I think at this point, like a lot of these Protestants, they don't see us as relevant enough, which I can kind of understand, because it's been a long time since there's been updated data. And the amount of times I see this stupid 2010 data pop up about how the Orthodox Church is dying, this, and this. It's like, I'm sorry, just walk into your average Orthodox church, try to get a hold of a priest. You're going to wait, like 2 weeks to try to just meet with a priest because they're so spread thin. I mean, like these poor priests are so spread thin with the amount of converts in American Orthodox churches, which, by the way, to everyone out there, like if you got the call to go be a priest, all the Orthodox Christians, like we desperately need it. That and the diaconate. Like we desperately need it. And so, yeah, it's just kind of comical, like when they argue that we're sort of like irrelevant. I think it's going to be harder and harder to ignore. I mean, Radim Zoomer's pointed this out. Like he saw this coming a couple years ago. And he's pointed out that like these other Reform guys are just now noticing like we can't be ignored anymore. Our online presence alone is pretty much surpassed that of like Protestantism. I mean, we're out here ratioing these guys like left and right. And I'm not saying that necessarily has any like substantial value. I'm just saying it's a testimony to like the momentum we have behind Orthodoxy in the West. I mean,
something they also say all the time is that every single Orthodox Christian is online. But what I think the hard thing for that is that there's a person behind that keyboard, and there's a person behind that profile, and that person is going to church. And the whole, the catechumens don't even go to church thing, that's not true. I mean, a lot of these people are going to church. They're on their way. You might have a handful of people that don't, but for the most part, they do. And so you end up with, like, I'm sorry, it correlates. Like if you're going to say, well, they're all online. Well, those online people are in America and have lives and they're living and they're around. So you can't just hand wave us like that forever. Joel Webbin, I don't know if you guys, Luigi, did you see the Joel Webbin video? I didn't watch the whole thing.
I watched about 10 minutes and I couldn't bear it anymore. I was like, this is too much.
That was actually really helpful for me too.
Oh, really?
Because I watched like maybe the first hour, maybe less. I'm not sure. I was watching on 2x speed, no idea. But maybe it was 30 minutes. But whatever I watched, it was really helpful because it was a lot of what I've encountered in real life coming out of the Reformed world, which is these guys will never be American. That's the main one, which is like, okay, not a theological point, so I don't really care. And then the other point being, well, evangelicals are effeminate and evangelicals are a little bit Skittles. And so because of that, everybody's going to Orthodoxy because it's masculine. And so you got all these dude bros that want to lift weights. And so they're going to Orthodoxy for masculine reasons. I was curious for you guys. Did you guys convert to Orthodoxy because you thought it'd be like super cool based Andrew Tate, or?
I actually saw Father Moses benching 467 and I just converted immediately. Like that was just it for me.
Would be based though. Would be a based reason.
I mean, like, yeah, even as a joke, I can't really come up. Like, for me, at least, this is the way I think generally. What other people do with the religion is really none of my concern, to be honest. I try not to like look at, oh, they do this, they do that. Obviously, in some regards, because of my weakness, but to me, it's more like I always had respect for Christianity, right? Me personally, even when I was not religious at all, and I just wanted the true, authentic form of it. That was my motivation, and I think that was the motivation for all of us. Ultimately, at some point, even if it was superficial at first, ultimately that's what kind of led us there. I think that's kind of how I will answer your question, Mario.
I
Yeah,
saw
I
this.
don't think
Oh,
I
sorry,
was gonna,
Luigi.
I was gonna say I don't like. It's hard to pinpoint even when people ask me like why I became Orthodox. Like I feel like I give a different reason every time because there's just like you brought up Mario, you brought up the idea of sort of the institutionally upholding tradition, right? And actively fighting against modernism, right, at an institutional level, and that's a very crucial point, right? Because I think there's a lot of people within Protestantism and a lot of people within Roman Catholicism that are fighting modernism, but it's not happening at the institutional level, right? It's sort of like an internal movement, right? And like you see this with like the Latin Mass, for example, right? It's like, okay, there's faithful Roman Catholics, they want to adhere to the Latin Mass, but the institution is not in favor of that, and Pope Francis has again and again made that very clear, right? Whereas our liturgy is ancient, right, going back to the first millennium, and like no one is even remotely trying to change that, let alone ostracize the people trying to uphold it, right? So that's just like one example, but I would say that that's really what the difference is like at the institutional level, we're upholding tradition. It's not just this little niche movement within Orthodoxy that's like super trad and based. Like, no, it's actually like the patriarchs, that are actually upholding this stuff.
I thought it was really funny when I like the conflicting narratives. You posted a tweet that pointed that out really well, Luigi, where you're posting like I can't remember exactly what you said. You remember the tweet I'm talking about where you were like, this week we've heard a lot of, and it was like a list of things. Yeah, and it was like,
it was funny because there was the one tweet that's he said, it was a Protestant. He was like, men are not going to convert to Orthodoxy. It's just too weird and mystical. And then there's all this like damage control, like simultaneously there's all this damage control of like trying to keep the young men in Protestant churches because they're all leaving for Orthodoxy. It's like
I like when their narrative is that we're too ethnic, and then it's also they can't fit in because they're too ethnic. And so you have to be in our church because that's our ethnicity. It's pretty funny. And then you combine that with they're converting because of masculine reasons. And then they say the reason we convert is solely aesthetics and smells and bells. And it's like, is that a masculine reason? Is it masculine to be like, oh, I'm going to be Orthodox because I like the way incense smells? I mean, kind of true, but still, I mean, like, I don't even know if they're just throwing things at the wall and seeing what sticks. And it is sad because they're in a frenzy. It's like a sort of, we're losing a bunch of people really fast to somebody we didn't expect. And we're not equipped for this. And our normal just pointing out liberalism with the Pope isn't going to work. Because that's their normal play. Their normal play is never theological. It's either you worship Mary or the Pope did something Democrat and liberal. That's really it. That's their normal play. And if you've got the churches in Greece excommunicating everybody who supports gay marriage, I mean, like, how's that going to work for you?
Yeah. On the tradition point, I just want to point out something. I think it's very important. A lot of people think tradition is an end in and of itself. Whereas tradition is useful insofar as it carries and maintains the truth that society holds, right? It's important insofar as maintains and carries that to the future. If you make tradition as an end, then your idol is tradition. You made tradition into an idol in and of itself. The whole point, again, of tradition is to maintain it. So, for example, when we speak about tradition in the Orthodox Church, is one of the things that it does is that it maintains and formulates and it keeps it and safeguards the biblical message, right? The meaning of scripture is maintained and kept to this day until the end of time, right? That's one of the mechanisms of the church, right? That's why tradition is useful. That's the point of tradition. Like, what, it's not to, oh, we're trying to be traditional, we're trying to do what people a long time ago did. Obviously there's some kind of sanctity behind like maintaining that, but I mean, if you maintain a tradition of, I don't know, dancing around the fire and burning poop on it, I mean, yeah, I mean, you kept that for 3,000 years, but I mean, what is that? That's not good. I mean, it will be better for you not to have that. It will be better for you to discard that, even, because it's not maintaining something that's actually has anything to do with truth, right? And people need to rethink tradition, right? I used to have this idea, right? Like when I first started to take politics and religion seriously, for me, it's like, oh, traditional things. That's the epic base thing that I should hold to. It's a tool. It's an instrument. It's useful as an instrument, and that's what people need to understand. So, like Roman Catholic traditionalists, Protestant traditionalists, right? Yeah, they're good insofar as they try to maintain biblical truths about, worshiping Jesus Christ, the sanctity of marriage, right? Relations, as opposed to unhealthy relations. I think everyone knows exactly what I'm talking about. But you need to understand it as what it actually is supposed to be, right? As a tool. At least that's what I think of tradition as. It's a very important and useful tool that you cannot deny. But it's a tool at the end of the day. It's not an end in and of itself. So on that, if you don't have on that point, I also want to move on to this other conversation I had with someone. I think this person is like some speaker's corner guy who debates Muslims, like this Christian guy. I don't know much about him. Again, I don't know a lot about many people, but I want to show this to you and to the audience as well. So he made this point, and I also want to I think we kind of talked about this point a little bit, right? So he made this tweet: Orthodox churches are infected with ethno-nationalism, and Orthodox Christians need to call it out and challenge it. Now, we already talked about this, like with our own experiences regarding this, but I also want to give you my point like a bit shortly. Again, we mentioned this before, right? But we just had popular Protestant accounts say Orthodoxy is not true because it's not Western, but now we are the ones with ethno-nationalism problem. And in general, I don't know if you guys will agree with me on this. In general, this whole like ortho-bro stuff, right? Like this name is mostly used as a smear, right? It's kind of like they look at things that other people do that we also do, rights and wrongs, mostly focusing on the wrongs and talking as if we are the ones exclusively doing these things. And do you think that this kind of like naming, is there any truth to it, or is this just kind of like, would you agree with kind of my assessment? What do you guys think?
I would say it's low on the totem pole as far as like concerns that I have about like the state of like orthodoxy. I think there is some maybe some valid concerns with ortho bros and the connotation that's usually associated with. But as far as like we have, in my opinion, we have much bigger fish to fry, like in as far as fighting like infiltration. And let's be real, like now that the Orthodox Church is gaining this much traction in the West, like the same entities that infiltrated Protestantism and infiltrated Roman Catholicism are going to try to infiltrate us. And we've already seen that starting to happen, right? And like that needs to be our primary focus, in my opinion, as far as like what we're criticizing with the Orthodox Church. Now, I do think that, if you're not attending liturgy, like you definitely should not be talking about orthodoxy online. Like that seems obvious, right? Like if you aren't going to liturgy and experiencing God, right? Like then you probably shouldn't be talking about theology. You probably shouldn't be debating theology. You probably, you got to start with living theology before you do any of that. And I think that's usually the criticism of ortho bros. And I think that's valid. But I also think it's low on our priority list as far as what we need to be fighting.
I also think it's just it's a silencing technique, because it's like they want to point out how many of us are neophytes, and I am a neophyte. Like I'm not preaching with any authority. I'm pointing people to the church. I'm not trying to get anybody to join me, and so it's like I totally recognize that a lot of us are new to the faith, but at the same time, just thinking that us being new to the faith automatically means we shouldn't talk about it is crazy to me, because it's like, it'd be one thing if we were trying to, teach things or, play the role of a priest and LARP as a priest online. But I have no interest in doing that. I have every interest in just pointing people to the real priests, to the real church, so they can be a part of it. And so, I don't know. I mean, in general, the Orthobro label is just said so that way, because they've been calling Luigi a catechumen for like a year now. Like, they're never going to stop. Like, they're just going to, as long as you're a 20-something-year-old man on the internet, you're a catechumen, and you're always going to be a catechumen. Doesn't matter how baptized you are. And so they're gonna come up with things to say to just get you to shut up. And at a certain point, it's like, well, this is the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is his church. And we're not going to just not tell people the good news of God. Like, we're not going to just not do that.
Yeah. And it's like, what did basically almost every saint and every single church father, like, that's what they did. Not that we're comparing ourselves to saints or church fathers, but we need to be following their example, right, of evangelism and of apologetics. And that's what they spent their writings on, Now, it's never disconnected from their prayer life and from living theology, right? And that's where I think a lot of people miss the mark, because, and that's really in some ways, it's a Western idea, sort of this like intellectual like disconnect from the lived theology, right? And we just don't compartmentalize like that in the East. And I think that's why there's concerns about that from members in the Orthodox Church, is because they don't want that to happen to us, right? Where we're disconnecting our theology from our life. Because, again, like a theologian is someone who lives theology, so like that needs to be emphasized. And I agree with that. And I think oftentimes when we're out here engaging with these e-Thomists, which I think are 10 times worse than Ortho Bros from my experience, but I think at times we sort of stoop to their level on some of this stuff. And we do kind of disconnect the Christian life from our intellectual debate with them. And I think we are guilty of that at times. I'm definitely guilty of that at times. So I think there is something to own up for there. But yeah.
Yeah, I want to show this tweet as well. It's a collection of tweets that some of these Protestant personalities have made to kind of give you a better idea of what their current arguments are. So it's a bit long. I don't want to read the entire thing, but the first one I want to start with Joel Webben. Again, I don't know who these people are. For the most part, I know Hans, he's like some Lutheran satire. I think he's the Lutheran satire guy. Stephen Wolf is a Christian nationalism guy. That's the most I know. So Joel Webben says, Eastern Orthodoxy is a fad. Evangelicals massively discredited themselves over the past few years. Response to Code and BLM. Eastern Orthodoxy only looks appealing by comparison. In the end, men will return to Protestantism for two reasons. Number one, the Bible. Protestants is the most scripturally faithful Christian tradition. Doubt. Number two, patriotism. So these are the two reasons, right? One is a claim that needs to be justified. Two is some earthly facts of human life, patriotism, because Protestantism is distinctly American, which I didn't know Luther was American. Western civilization has historically proven itself to be the superior culture. Okay, I made the point recently, right? Like, so Greece, Russia, I mean, they're not part of Western civilization, but Egypt and North Africa is. So that's kind of sounds strange on the face of it. Long-term, the great Western tradition will not be abandoned. Heritage, Americans for Eastern mysticism, and essential oils for men. So again, I think we kind of talked about, what do you guys think about this? Like, just
first off, if anybody's the great Western tradition, there's no way it's Baptist, dude. Like, if you watch a little Dark Age edit of like who built the West, it's going to be like 90% like Michelangelo, Catholic Sistine Chapel stuff, some Crusade flicks, and then maybe you might get like Luther or something if you're lucky. But I mean, really, who thinks of the Western tradition and thinks of Pastor Jim Bob's church? Not to be that guy mentioning that classic meme, but seriously. And then the Bible, it's like, well, okay, your interpretation of the Bible needs to be so compelling that I'm willing to leave the visible structure of the church and the consensus of the fathers. And they go, well, the church fathers don't agree on anything, and they try to obfuscate, but we all know that's just not true. You can read them. Sorry, we have the internet, baby. You can just look it up. Protestantism is distinctly American, and they're going to return for patriotism. Sorry, I'm already a real American patriot. So that would work if it wasn't for the fact that I'm already a real American patriot who loves America and loves my country. And I'm never going to leave. I'm not going to leave the church, God willing. So just so stupid. And yeah. I like Joel, by the way. He's had a lot of good things to say about a lot of stuff. He and I are mutuals on there. I like the guy. No disrespect to him, but he doesn't know what he's talking about here at all.
Yeah, he's otherwise pretty base. But I always chuckle whenever Protestants make this point about the Bible, or when they use the term. I tweeted about this a couple weeks ago, Bible believing. Go to a Bible believing church, and it's what do you what does that even mean? Every Christian claims to be Bible believing, and so his argument here is that Protestantism is the most faithful to Scripture, and it's okay, well, that's what's in question. That's the entire debate, right? And Mario, like you just pointed out, your interpretation of Scripture has to be so convincing that it supersedes the witness of patristics, the people who knew the apostles. That's how good your interpretation of Scripture needs to be. And sorry, but it's not that good. All I have to do is give an equally compelling interpretation, and then the tie goes to the church fathers, right? Obviously, that's seems pretty obvious. But to a Protestant, they say these things like Bible believing, or same thing with the solas. They just assume this stuff is self-evident, and it's this needs to be demonstrated. This is where the entire debate lies, right? This is what we've been debating about for 500 years. By the way, you've been debating about it amongst each other for 500 years. Things like infant baptism, things like, is baptism even necessary for salvation, which every reformer believed except for Zwingli, right? You guys have been debating these things and anathematizing each other over this stuff for 500 years. And then all of a sudden you guys got buddy-buddy in the last maybe 50, because you had to, because you're too small to exist on your own. So
they don't realize ecumenism is a new thing for them.
Right.
They don't even realize it's a new thing for them.
Exactly. And that's what I criticize when they say Orthodox mean, it's well, you were mean forever until you had no choice but to be an ecumenist. If you read all of the reformers, if you read the second, third generation reformers, read the Council of Dort and what it says about Arminians. It anathematizes Arminians, but that's most of Protestant. That's like Baptists. A lot of Baptists are Arminian, right? It's this is just an insane contradiction. It's you were just as mean for a long time until you had no choice but to be ecumenist.
And what Joel and Stephen and Hans are saying is almost so stupid that I almost think that it's when your enemy's making a mistake, don't correct them. Don't let them know. You know what I mean? So in a sense, I almost thought about it before I got on. I was is it even a good idea to have this stream? Because it's we don't really want their apologetics to get any better. This is kind of perfect the way it is. This is great. Because indirectly, this is going to lead a lot of people to the church. Bad Protestant arguments did a lot to bring me to the church. But with that still being said, I still think it's worth addressing, because there are some people of good faith who might find this compelling, and it would be great to, show them why it's not.
Yeah. When you were talking about kind of the tradition aspect, right? Western civilization, and you were talking about little Dark Age edits and the Crusades being shown. In terms of if we're talking about Western civilization, the Roman Empire is the Western civilization for a lot of people, for most people. If anyone who has a little bit of history knowledge, proper history knowledge of the medieval era, the Roman Empire exists until 1453. So, and it's what people refer to as the Byzantine Empire. So, again, it's kind of, even if you took this to be right, Western civilization, right? Protestantism is Western civilization. Roman Empire, which was Orthodox, is part of that civilization by that logic. And Stephen's point, to what Luigi was talking about in terms of meanness, attack the Eastern Church and attack Islam on this app, and you get the same type of responses. Okay, so the anathemas that were given throughout Protestant history is that Eastern as well? Should we talk? Is that Eastern too? Is ecumenism what's truly Western? What you see is you actually see this new tradition coming out in the West, especially with Protestants. This new tradition being this kind of like interdenominational ecumenism amongst the Protestants, in opposition particularly to Orthodox Christians, and trying to form this kind of alliance, this politically enforced alliance, so to speak, against Islam, atheism, and now Orthodoxy. It seems to be included in this. At least that's kind of how I see it, because you kind of have this, run-of-the-mill Orientalism and this kind of attitude. Again, if he was transported into the 16th to 17th centuries, the Eastern attitude is, is prevalent throughout the Protestant churches as well. I mean, wouldn't you say that?
Yeah, and Stephen's tweet, because the one where he says attack the Eastern Church and attack Islam, and you get the same response. That tweet, it goes on. He says a type of deeply visceral combativeness mixed with mental instability and low IQ attempts at humor that are only a few degrees away from burning your neighborhood to the ground. And then, which I just think is just like drama central. I like Stephen Wolfe. I'm like, but really, dude, really? And then this guy, Dan, he responds, he goes, what's the most dangerous thing about it is its orientalist appeal to disenfranchised Westerners, mostly young men, whose self-loathing is cultivated by the Eastern Orthodox Church's intrinsic anti-Westernism and subsumed into a religion alien to the simple gospel. The reason why I read that tweet was because I think that really crystallizes how they feel. If there's any way to really crystallize the way that Reformed Protestants feel, it's that. It's that we're these self-loathing anti-Western people that in our own cynicism have found a church that approves and aligns with our cynicism about our country and our cynicism about our heritage. And as a result, we've ended up rejecting the simple gospel, which would be like faith alone or whatever. And I think that this really crystallizes how they feel, is that we're subversives. I think that's how they view us, as subversives that are, taking weak evangelicals and putting them into our tradition. And I think they see it as a sort of furtherance of the Great Replacement narrative, but applied to religion. And so I think that that's how they approach Orthodox American Christians. And I think that's the majority of the pushback that guys like Luigi and I get in our personal lives.
But I mean, won't they want Ortho Bros? Because isn't one of the typical characterizations that they're super ethno-nationalists and all that jazz?
Well, then that's the thing too, is that for the longest time, the Christian nationalist crowd did not attack us. And the main reasoning for that was because we are allies politically. Just point blank, we are allies politically in the sense that we don't want mass immigration, we don't want abortion, we don't want these other taboo issues to be pushed into our culture, generally anti-contraceptive, things like that. And so I think that they like that that we're largely political allies. And so they've sort of, there's the whole no enemies to the right idea. So they haven't attacked us that much. But I think recently it's affecting them where they're seeing people in their congregation leave. And a lot of these Christian nationalist guys are pastors. And, assuming the best of these guys and assuming they really, have a huge heart for the people in their flock, it's got to be disconcerting when you see a young man with a chip on his shoulder who's zealous potentially leave your church and go join another, and you're like, is he in good hands? You know what I mean? And so just assuming the absolute best of these guys, there's a real chance they're seeing guys in their flock leave and they just don't know what to do about it. Like, I mean, in my friend group alone, in real life, I mean, Luigi can attest, he's met a lot of these guys. They're all Orthodox now. I mean, like 7 of my buddies, I mean, maybe 7's just stretching it, but a whole bunch of my friends converted. My buddy Taylor, my buddy Dylan, my buddy Cole, and only one guy stayed in the Protestant church. And I only have one Catholic friend left because my other Catholic friends converted. And so it's got to be disconcerting for these guys. I don't see how you wouldn't lash out. But what I would encourage them is just to look into some of the theology, because just like the ad homs about, oh, you're just converting over aesthetics and you didn't really look into this, and if you only knew about high church Protestantism, you would have stayed. No, we left high church Protestantism. That's what we left, bro. So I didn't leave the light show church. I didn't leave Stephen Furtick guitar mass. I didn't leave that I left as high of the church as I could go. And I know Luigi, he actually sought out the highest church, Protestant church that he could find.
Yeah.
And
Inquired into Anglicanism. I was just going to say, inquired into Anglicanism for a while, even as a Presbyterian, but like the Presbyterian church I was going to was very liturgical. It was the highest church you could get really within the PCA. It was in a traditional building and everything. And yeah, like he said, I sought out, I very, very strongly considered like becoming Anglican. But the reality is like the other thing with these high church Protestant groups is they're just incredibly divided. I mean, and even like the most base, like the ACNA, like they just appointed an archbishop over America that is pro women's ordination. And it's like, even in the based like sects within the high church Protestant groups, right? Even there's still infiltration there at the institutional level. And that's why the conservatives have to keep breaking off and breaking off and breaking off and breaking off. And like, if you don't see that as chastisement, like, I don't know what to tell you, dude. Like, that is obvious like discipline against you. Like it to me, it was when I was looking into it.
Yeah, I also want to add something quite short, but you mentioned about like high church Protestantism, right? I see this point being made a lot on Twitter as well. Like a lot of like high church Protestants saying, oh, you're only attacking low church Protestantism. That's what you think all Protestants do. Look, we are high church. The problem I have with this kind of argument is that even if you have high church Protestantism is still within the realm. It's still it's included side by side with low church Protestantism in the sense that it doesn't exclude it completely. And what I'm trying to get at is that in Orthodoxy, right, one of the criticisms of Orthodoxy, like you see with Orton, for example, is that we are too exclusivist, right? We exclude other groups too much. Well, actually, excluding heretical understandings is something you're supposed to do. I mean, that's what St. Paul does, right? Even if an angel brings you another gospel, let him be anathema, right? Like he says anathema, like quite literally. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that high church Protestantism, if it was truly high church in its essence, should consider low church Protestantism as at least completely heretical and something that you should complete, but it doesn't, right? It allows for that some kind of coexistence in some sense. I understand that there's even within Lutherans and other Protestants where they historically have been opposed to each other. I'm just talking about like today, principally speaking. For example, in terms of Protestants, right, because of their beliefs in regards to sola scriptura, they don't really have this understanding of normative, authoritative judgment that the church gives that you have to follow in order to remain as a Christian. Like we have, like for example, you have to follow the 7 ecumenical councils in order to be Orthodox Christians. It's not something that you can't just say, I accept 6 councils, but I refuse the 7th. You can't do that, right? You have to accept all of the normative judgments that the church gives. Whereas as a Protestant, you don't have to, right? You just have the Bible at the end of the day, right? Tradition can guide you to a correct biblical understanding, to Protestant understanding, but ultimately it doesn't give you normative judgment. And that's what's actually lacking. And that's one of the reasons, at least why I see that you can't really maintain a biblical faith, because Scripture teaches that the church is the pillar and ground of truth, and it has various different normative judgments within it, like Acts 15, right? You have the Council of the Apostles as an example of this. You can talk more and more, but I think it will be too long. It will need to be a separate video. And many other examples such as this one, I think you can kind of see that Protestantism fails to exclude enough. I would say Protestantism is not exclusive enough at the end of the day, right? Exclusivism is used as kind of like an attack against us. From my perspective, you do need to exclude these other groups in order to maintain the purity of faith.
Right. And this is one thing I press, Protestants on, especially, I like to use the example of oneness Pentecostals, right? Because they still uphold the divinity of Christ, right? And so, but people will say, well, they reject the Trinity. It's like, well, they reject that there's 3 distinct persons, but they believe in the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. So where in Scripture can you show me where it says you have to believe in 3 distinct persons in order to be considered a Christian? Right? Now, I believe Scriptures teach that there's 3 distinct persons, but where does it say that that's a salvation requirement? Because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about exclusion, right? What are the requirements to be saved? And And I just have never heard a good answer to this, like, because it's all ambiguous. When you throw out the normative authority as something that's infallible, you can sort of just accept and reject whatever you want. And I do give some credit to guys like Jordan B. Cooper, because like he like, I remember when the SBC like decided to reject the Nicene Creed, like he specifically said like he doesn't see them really as like a valid visible church anymore. Like, so it's like, okay, well, at least you have that standard, right? Like the Nicene Creed, you have to at least uphold the Nicene Creed. But then it's like, okay, why is that the standard? Like, and these are all questions that, you just don't get an answer to, I don't think, without an infallible normative authority.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about, well, we got some super chat support, so I want to shout them out briefly. Thank you for the £2, I believe, donation, Rigovich. Really appreciate it. 5 Aussie dollars from Sincere Hypocrite. He says, these Protestant pastors are so out of touch who still think EO is some hybrid of Christianity and Far Eastern religions. It's such an old myth, especially like the point about Far Eastern religions. I think it's significantly overplayed and it's very much misunderstood. What do you guys think in terms of?
I mean, I think
he says, yeah.
Well, I think there's a lot to say about that. I do think that there's hijacking of things that, things like hesychasm, I think, have been hijacked in other Eastern religions, and made into something that it's not, right? Hesychasm, like Mario was talking about, this goes all the way back to even a second Temple Jewish tradition, right? Especially if you read Religion of the Apostles. Father Stephen DeYoung talks about this, about the tradition that Paul's actually referencing when he talks about the ascent in the seven heavens. That's actually a reference to hesychastic type prayers that the Second Temple Jews would do when they would say the Shema over and over again. But I think like anything that is good, Eastern religions have hijacked this type of stuff, right, and turned it into things that it's not. They've turned, because that's what demons do, right? They hijack that which is good. So that's kind of my thought on that.
Well, you also just have a very ill-defined understanding of what meditation is in the Protestant community. I mean, whenever we would talk about meditating on the scriptures or meditating on things, I would hear people say things, well, like not in like a yoga sort of way or not in like a Eastern Hindu sort of way, but we're meditating on it as in we're focusing on the truth in something. So you've got this sort of vaguely defined notion anyway, where it's like, yeah, I mean, if you're vague enough, you can make anything sound like anything. It's like, okay, well, Islam has a holy book. Protestantism has a holy book. Oh, wow. Are you guys like the same? Oh, Hindus have images. Lutherans have images. Are you guys the same? Like, you can do this sort of equivocation when you're working with really vague definitions. But what I would want to see from them is, okay, what exactly are Buddhists doing? What exactly are Hindus doing? And then show me how the guys on Mount Athos are doing that. And if you don't have that, and the best you have is, well, they're focusing and they're repeating stuff. And like, that's all you got is like, they're repeating prayers. It's like, okay, dude, like, like that doesn't get us to where you're trying to take us. So I would just encourage them, be precise in what you're critiquing. Otherwise it's so vague, it can mean anything. And that's the other thing. I mean, the majority of Protestant apologetics is going to always be this sort of drive-by tagline, sort of sloganeering. It's always a slogan, and it makes sense, the whole faith alone thing, but it never really got out of slogans. You talk to a Protestant about intercession of saints, they're going to be like, well, there's one mediator, right? Like, they got their slogan, their off the cuff slogan to respond to us. And that's why I think us having slogans to respond to them is really important. Because I know they'll roll their eyes at stuff like, oh, you would kiss a picture of a dead relative. You know what I mean? Or like certain lines like that we use. But it's like, but you need a slogan, because for the vast majority of Protestants, that's all they have is a slogan, and they haven't thought much more about it besides that. That's not to say they're stupid. I'm not implying that at all. I don't think they're stupid. But it's just, this hasn't been challenged for them. And so all they have is a slogan line in their heads. And it's not due to any sort of stupidity or anything like that. It's just, they don't know. Yeah.
And on that point, I'll also move to the next one. Thank you for the $2 super chat. You'll notice, especially those who are watching my videos, maybe I've always done this, but I'm slurring my words. I'm sorry. It's 4 a.m. right now. I'm normally supposed to be sleeping, so it's not easy for me. Just wanted to point that out. $2 from Gumstream. Thank you for the support. First Speaker of the House in the U.S. was Lutheran. Nice fact. That's kind of how I see it. Isaac SYB, $5 super chat. Thank you, Isaac. I converted because I thought the 3-bar cross was pretty. It is pretty. It's a good reason to convert. It's a bit tongue in cheek, but
They did clarify they were joking for those that are on Twitter right now that can't see that.
yeah, I mean, you see so many things on Twitter, but like you kind of think they can't be serious, and they are. So, like, kind of a lot of the stuff that we're talking about. I mean, again, to show the people the screen. I mean, to me, honestly, if you made these arguments, to me, I will just kind of just laugh because I just don't get how people think it this way. But as you said, I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons why it captures kind of the common, how should I say, intuitions that a lot of people have, and it's just an expressed version of that common intuition. On Mario's point about like mysticism, it's really ironic because on the one hand you have we straight true to the Bible. On the other hand, you have a complete denigration of the genuine biblical tradition of praying without ceasing, something that St. Paul literally commands us to do, fasting and meditating, and in terms of in an actual, it's like not meditating in terms of like yoga or like imagining things in your head, but kind of like genuine Christian meditation, understanding the Christian truths, and for example, fasting, right, in isolation and praying and staying in prayer with God, like for example, Christ gave us an example: 40 days in the desert, right? You have Saint John the Forerunner living in very ascetic life, right? If you looked at Saint John the Forerunner, if you were, if all of us went to the first century, we looked at Saint John the Forerunner, we will barely see any difference between him and the way ascetics live in Mount Athos or in monasteries today in the Orthodox Church. It's not a lot of difference. You won't see a lot of difference there, right? It's very, in terms of the spiritual life, it's pretty much the same spiritual life. Well, there's a reason why that's the case, right? That spirit is maintained in the Orthodox Church. So you kind of actually have a denigration of all of these biblical aspects and just kind of pushed away. These were all particular for their time instead of something that we imitate in terms of in order to become holy, right? Which is what, again, we're ordered, right? We are ordered, God orders us to be holy as he is holy, right? And we do this by being in communion with him, by the faith, by the sacraments, so on and so forth. That's kind of at least how I will look. I don't see this like Eastern mystic stuff as being a legitimate argument, because you can find any kind of like mystical stuff in most religions, including even Protestantism, if you push it hard enough. It's not about whether you're mystic or Eastern mystic. It's kind of, again, what's the source of this, right? And if you look at scripture, you actually do see sources of, as Mario pointed out, you see sources of it, of what we do in Orthodoxy in terms of our ascetic life and in terms of like monks and monasteries. You see precedents of that in the Old Testament and in the life of St. John the Forerunner, for example. And I will go as far as to say even the Virgin Mary, if you look at the way her life is recorded in the Proto-Evangelium of James. Not that it's scripture, but it is a record of her life that's maintained in the Orthodox tradition at the very least, right? You see even that. You see, again, the Old Testament, the prophets. There's many examples, actually, of all of these things. So it's not just some Eastern thing. It's deeply rooted in scripture at the end of the day. I don't see any. If there's no questions, I think we can kind of. It's been now, so I think we can wrap it up. Anything you guys want to end the stream with, kind of like just your takeaways with this topic or anything of that sort?
I mean, I guess I'll just say that, we'd like to keep the dialogue up with the Protestants that are willing, like I feel bad because it's like Redeemed Zoomer is like one of the only guys that stepped up and actually debated us. Obviously Gavin Ortland makes videos, but he won't debate Jay, he won't debate me. So, I mean, like we're ready to have more dialogue like that. I think it was helpful for those that did watch the debates with Redeemed Zoomer, and a lot of props to him for being like the only one to like step up and engage with us in a debate fashion. So I guess we've offered, Jay and I have offered several, including Joel, and like I just hope that they take us up on it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I remember, I think Trent Horn said that it will be a great idea to have like a roundtable discussion between Orthodox, Roman Catholics, and Protestants. He was saying, like Trent Horn will represent the Roman Catholic side, Ortland will represent the Protestant side in terms of, in the discussion about icon veneration. I made a couple of videos. So I also said, this is a great idea. I'd like to represent the Orthodox side. Whether it will be me or Craig Truly, which is what he suggested, that didn't happen, right? So I think there's some things that could have happened. I think will be very fruitful as a discussion, but at the same time, especially for a lot of the Protestants, I think the strategy that they think will work so far is just doing this, right? Like what you see on screen, just doing that. But I think at some point, it has to be a lot more substantial at some point. You can't really rely on slogans and low-tier arguments like Orthodoxy is not Western enough, it's Eastern mysticism, it's a fad. At some point, you're going to have to take it seriously. And if you don't, then your fears are just going to keep on becoming reality. That's just what I can say about this.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get a better mic for next time. But I appreciate having you guys let me be here and talk about this, because I feel like it's something that when you're a convert in America, this is the main thing that you're going to deal with. More than you're going to hear about icons, more than you're going to hear about the Virgin Mary, it's going to be the foreignness of it. And I think traditional Christianity is pretty foreign to your average Protestant regardless. So even if you're on your path to, I don't know, more like high church Protestantism, that's still pretty foreign if you grew up with guitar and drums. And so for me personally, it didn't make that big of a difference if it was East or West, because high church liturgy, regardless, was pretty foreign compared to my evangelical megachurch upbringing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think you could even add Roman Catholicism into the mix, because I don't think Roman Catholicism is as naturally Western in the United States as a lot of people make it seem to be. There's a lot of things that traditional, like heritage Americans, as you guys say, would pretty much not want, or like historically was against, right? Especially in the 20th century and even before the 20th century, right? Like throughout American history, it was something that they were consciously against until, I would say, quite recently. What do you guys like? Maybe, like, again, I'm not American, so I might be completely wrong on this, but you guys will have a better idea. Like, it seems to me that
have you ever seen the beware foreign influence flag that people post all the time? That's about Catholics. I mean, the anti-Catholic sentiment in the U.S. has been there for forever, and like there has been Catholics in power at different points, and there has been a Catholic presence since our founding, but in general, this was a pan-Protestant project. I mean, the Christian nationalist guys are right about it, that America really is a pan-Protestant country, and that it wasn't, and that Catholics, for the most part, were probably the Orthodox of their time as far as ethnicities are concerned. I mean, my Catholic family, like people in my family that are Catholic, like my Aunt Michelle, she went to a Italian Catholic church, and they don't speak the same language as the Irish Catholics back in the day. And, and things looked very different back then. I think since the post-conciliar era and since Vatican II, they've done a better job assimilating to American culture, but that came at a price. They had to Protestantize their liturgy to a great extent. And they did end up getting more ethnic diversity within their churches, where, you no longer hear about Irish Catholic churches or Italian Catholic churches. There's just churches. But, that took a long time. That took nearly like a half a century to even get there. So,
well, and they still haven't done that with their Eastern Catholic, because you still have Byzantine, you have Chaldean. So like they still have to. Yeah. So it's still true to an extent, even for them.
Yeah, but it's like, but Orthodox in America are gonna, over time, probably centralize more. I mean, I know that there's a lot of jurisdictional overlap, a lot of jurisdictional, debate as to who should have what and how this should all look. But I can't imagine that if Orthodoxy continues to grow and 100 years go by, that it wouldn't look any different.
Yeah, exactly. I think the main takeaway is that it's a genuine development and a process, what you see in the West, and I think what you see in the rest of the world, rest of the world, in terms of the growth of Orthodoxy, right? And it's an organic tradition, right? It's not something that just remains static, right? We're talking about a tradition that lasts for thousands of years. That it lasts for thousands of years does not mean it just stays in place. It's right. It stays in place, right? It's rooted in history, but it's also at the same time rooted in the present, right? It moves with the present. It develops in accordance with the present. And I think this is what we're seeing right now as people become Orthodox, especially in the West. And you will see, and I envision, at least when you look at certain aspects of Orthodox theology that is not really explored, as time moves on, when these things get studied, I think there's going to be a newfound way of understanding the world and each other in light of certain points about Orthodox theology, whether it's about essentiality distinction, hesychasm, or even simple things that Christians all agree, but sometimes haven't really taught deeper about it, such as Christology, right? The nature of Christ. How does the humanity, divinity of Christ interact in sense, right? Because this is something that's been debated even in the Protestant tradition, right? You see with, for example, the Reformed and the Lutherans have different ideas on this point, just as an example. And the Orthodox, I think, have a very unique and intimate understanding of the communion between divinity and humanity. Again, this will all be part of a different stream. Again, sorry for, I've slurred a lot of my speech, my words. It's 4 a.m. It's very late. I'm very tired. So I think it will be fitting to end the stream here. Just as a last thank you, Blue Skittle, thank you for the $5 super chat. Unfortunately, the super sticker isn't shown on StreamYard, but people on YouTube can see it. So thank you, Mario. Thank you, Luigi, for coming here. I really enjoyed having you on. I think this was an excellent stream on your part. And if you don't have any final words, I think we can end the stream here. Thank you for watching this, and I'll see all of you in the next video or live stream. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you for the next time. Take care and goodbye.